عليكم ورحمة الله. لعل ضغوط الحرب الباردة ما زالت مستعرة اليوم، وقد تكون الضربة القاسمة للاتحاد الأوروبي الهش والناتو. مع مدير المركز الألماني للدراسات الأوراسية مانويل أوكزنرايتر نستشرف حال ألمانيا الجيوسياسية وعلاقاتها الخارجية، ولا سيما العلاقة مع روسيا والاتحاد الأوروبي من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. مأزق هو أقل ما يقال عما يواجه ألمانيا اليوم، فالأزمة الأوكرانية جاءت بجحافل أمريكا إلى منطقتهم، فالألمان ومعهم دول أوروبية أخرى يريدون رفع العقوبات عن روسيا، ولكن نشر الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية قواتها في المنطقة في سياق حلف شمال الأطلسي جعل من مسألة التخلص من العقوبات أمرا معقدا وحولها إلى قضية جانبية بحسب المراقبين. أما الروس فقلقهم هو النوايا الأمريكية. من جهة أخرى ألمانيا تواجه مشاكل اقتصادية حادة، فالاتحاد الأوروبي والناتو دعامتا الاستراتيجية الألمانية القومية يواجهان الاحتكاك داخلهما وبينهما. الاستراتيجية الألمانية الطبيعية هي أن لا تقوم بشيء، ولكن عدم القيام بشيء يعني السماح لمجموعة من القوى المزعزعة للاستقرار بتقويض المصالح الألمانية الأساسية. ويرى الخبراء أنه فيما يقوم الأمريكيون والروس بتحقيق مساعيهم في أوروبا، لا يمكن لألمانيا أن تنزع إلى استراتيجيتها التي انتهجتها لقرن من الزمن، وهي بناء قواتها العسكرية لحماية مصالحها. لذلك يرى المراقبون أن الخيار الآخر الوحيد هو أن تجد ألمانيا وسيلة للتوازن بين الروس والأمريكيين. الأمريكيون هم الأقوى ولكنهم الأبعد جغرافياً، أما الروس فهم الأضعف ولكنهم الأقرب جغرافياً بحسب المتابعين. هذا ما يساوي بين الاثنين. الآن يبدو أن ألمانيا قلقة من الأمريكيين أكثر من قلقها من الروس، فالروس يسعون إلى حماية أنفسهم ومصالحهم، أما الأمريكيون فبمقاومتهم لذلك قد يقومون بما أتوا عليه خلال القرن العشرين: إغراق أوروبا بقوتهم. وبالإحاظ الوضع الاقتصادي الهش في ألمانيا حالياً قد تتمكن أمريكا من زعزعة مؤسساتها. لذلك نرى أن ما قد تقوم به ألمانيا اليوم يشبه ما قامت به بريطانيا في القرن التاسع عشر: مد الجسور مع روسيا. مانويل أوكزنرايتر مدير المركز الألماني للدراسات الأوراسية ورئيس تحرير المجلة الشهرية الألمانية الرائدة سوئرست يشرح من الداخل الأزمات السياسية والاقتصادية التي تواجه ألمانيا والاتحاد الأوروبي، ويصف بعض الأحداث المفاجئة وآثارها، وماذا عن أولويات ألمانيا اليوم في علاقتها بروسيا. Manuel Oxenreiter, director of the German Center for Eurasian Studies and editor-in-chief of the leading German monthly news magazine Zuerst. Welcome again to Min الداخل from the inside, sir.
Thank you.
Always welcome, sir. Well, allow us to talk a bit today about something referred to as the EU fragmentation and fragility. When you talk about Europe, Manuel, you describe it as the EU is something non-European. What do you mean by this? Is it identity-wise?
On many levels. What we call the European Union, it's not a European project. It is not, first of all, it is not supported by the people of Europe. Especially today, we have many projects of this European Union where the people never were asked if they wanted. They never were called for example, for a referendum about these things. One of the major topics of this EU, for example, is the European currency, the euro, which was introduced in a sort of dictatorial decision by, unfortunately also by Germany, by the way, by a country where 80% of the population were against this currency. But this just is one of many, many examples. The European Union is a unity which stands for something else than what we could call European values, also cultural values. It is a westernized liberal project which is driven internal by an ideology of liberal individualism. It is fighting against traditions, it is fighting against culture, against religion, against any terms of collective identity inside Europe. So it's fighting there, and outside Europe, it's fighting as well against these things with the under this humanitarian ideology of human rights input, and that makes this European Union something anti-European, of course.
Now, some observers note that the EU is a failed project and that it is only a matter of time when it will be finally over. You are an EU citizen, you are German, you are an EU citizen. What is your opinion about the future of the EU? Is it disintegrating?
I don't share the optimism of the quote before, although I'm convinced that the person who said this meant it in a pessimist way. I would say yes, the sooner the EU collapses, the better. But we have to see this construction, this entity, European Union, as something like it's like a creature. It's alive. We have thousands of people earning money in the EU institutions. So to say it like this, the EU will fight until the bitter end, until the last drop of blood for its existence. And we see this fight, we saw it with the referendum about the Brexit in Britain, how, I mean, when you were reading the reactions from Brussels and especially Berlin after this, I mean, 100 years ago after such statements you were sending the fleet to bombard someone. So the aggressivity and the really hot nature, the hot nature of the comments against these things show that the European Union is an entity which will fight and which will not just
And there is
disappear.
also a youth element into that, of course, because, you know, when you talk about the Brexit, and the youth decided that they don't longer want to be part of the EU. Now, we tend to observe Germany as an independent and powerful state with a strong economy, as they say, and with position of the most privileged country in the EU. Yet there are certain problems rising in Germany. I would appreciate if you can enlighten us a bit about the political and the economic situation of Germany and how sovereign and free is Germany today.
Germany has, since, we can say, since 1990, since the reunification, Germany has a very dangerous disbalance between political influence and economical influence. We are the economic powerhouse of the European Union. We are one of the last industrialized countries in Europe. Without Germany, this European Union cannot exist. With all our industry is keeping the European engine running. So this is, we were for many years the masters of export. Now the Chinese have the place number one, but of course the German economy is a giant. The German politics is a dwarf at the same time, and this is a dangerous disbalance between the two. So you have a very powerful industry, but you are not really able politically to control your industry. These are doing others. So many things when it comes to governance, the decisions are not done in Berlin, they are done in Washington, they are done in Brussels, and they are also done in Tel Aviv. So while the important decisions about industry are done in Düsseldorf, Stuttgart, Munich, and this is a very dangerous disbalance because it makes others taking advantage of our tremendous industrial power, which can make countries shaking. If we want, we can with our economical potential, we can do a lot in positive and also negative. We can put sanctions on a country, and the country will find out how much they imported from Germany in this moment. We can press a country with the back against the wall if we do this. And this is dangerous when it doesn't come together with political responsibility, or if the political decisions behind these things are done in other countries. And this is our main problem.
Yes. Today, Manuel, what are the priorities in Germany? Is it the immigration, refugees and Pegida, which is the patriotic Europeans against the Islamization of the West? Is it Wahhabism and the sleeping cells internally? Is it the EU, the NATO and the war on terrorism?
So it's interesting, this collection of maybe if you think so, of different topics, but they are all interrelated. I will just give you a very short and pragmatic example. We had Nobody could imagine in Germany 5 years ago that we would have a new political party which is anti-Merkel, Eurosceptic. In the best way, maybe you can compare it with the Italian Lega Nord or the Austrian Freedom Party or the Front National in France. Nobody could imagine that such a thing could be alive in Germany, such an oppositional force. So in 2013, we had the foundation of such a party, the Alternative für Deutschland, Alternative for Germany, and the reason by the time was Euroscepticism. So they were it was because of all these Euro rescue packages for Greece and for other countries. So these were Germans who came together, they said, well, we have to get back our sovereignty. We have to be a sovereign country and we are anti-Merkel. So after this, after 2013, this party had immediately 5, 6, 7%. The refugee crisis started.
Right.
So the party went up in the polls. They have now 20 to 30%. At the same time, Pegida started rallying in Dresden. Pegida had at its highest times more than 20,000 people on the streets. The people, the individual people who were going on the protest, there were some people, they didn't have bad intentions, but indeed to canalize the anger against refugees, or what Pegida also did against a certain religion, against Islam. That is a thing which directed all this anger in the wrong direction. But the people have reason for anger, and they were looking for how can we express and where can we express it, and they are angry with the German government, they are angry with Angela Merkel, and this is now we come to a major problem when it comes to Germany. We don't have real political opposition. We have now one party, this is this AfD, which openly says we will fight against Angela Merkel under all circumstances, while all the other parties, when it comes to any decisive political project, support Angela Merkel. They support Angela Merkel when it comes to NATO operations, when it comes to questions about the EU, when it comes to the aggression against the Russian Federation, when it comes to sanctions against Russia, sanctions against Syria, sanctions against Iran, and sanctions against whoever, maybe in future against Lebanon. They all will support her. So we don't have real opposition in Germany. We are not used to this, and this is one of our major problems. This is why Pegida all of a sudden was there, and much more people joined it than originally were expected. We have in Germany a strong problem of political culture, and this is now today obvious in this mess we are in.
But Manuel, what is the number one priority in Germany today? Before we go into a break, please.
The number one priority for Germany should be to regain as quick as possible the sovereignty over the country. That would be the number one project. All the other problems are connected to this, but indeed, to say about the existential thing, Germany should stop immediately to support terrorism in other countries, to stop the migration wave. At the same time, it is not enough to build a wall or a fence when you are not on the other side. Stop supporting those who make people refugees or who make people leaving the country. Germany should immediately quit the NATO membership. They should, because if Germany would say today, let's do a European project for defense, others would follow. So we have plenty of projects which are decisive and necessary, but they are all connected to self-determination and to real independence and sovereignty.
Excellent. Manuel, allow us to stop now for a short break, and then afterwards we're going to talk a bit more and shed some light on the Blockupy movement. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. نظمت حركة بلوكيوباي في فرانكفورت تظاهرة منددة بافتتاح المبنى الجديد المخصص للبنك المركزي الأوروبي ECB، وأخذت هذه التظاهرة منحا عنفيا وكانت تبعاتها مزلزلة، حيث وقع ضحيتها أكثر من 300 جريح، من بينهم 150 ضابط شرطة وفقا للتقارير الإعلامية. أما تكاليف الخسائر فتقدر بالملايين، وهناك ما يزيد على 100 تقرير عن أضرار في الممتلكات وفقا للمحققين. لكن وسائل الإعلام الألمانية والمؤسسة السياسية في برلين تحاول أقصى جهدها لتجميل سمعة البنك المركزي الأوروبي المعتلة. مانويل أوكزرايتر مدير المركز الألماني للدراسات الأوراسية يشرح من الداخل من هم الناشطون في حركة بلوكيوباي ولما اتخذ الحراك فرانكفورت مسرحا له.
Well, Blockupy are anti-globalists or globalism critics. They are ordinarily connected to the political left, to the far left. They appear not just when it comes to the European Central Bank building in Frankfurt, but also when it comes to G7 or G8 meetings in Germany, when it comes to other conferences, industrial conferences, and they are
like the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Exactly like the Occupy movement, and they are against financial globalism. Their critics against the European currency and against the European Central Bank, and the European Central Bank is located in Frankfurt, which is a sort of tradition because Frankfurt is known as the place of the German central bank, of the Bundesbank. First, and the Deutsche Mark, the German mark, was an indicator of stability always in Europe. The Deutsche Mark was always stable, so they wanted to give the euro the same nimbus as the Deutsche Mark had of stability. So this is why the ECB building is actually in Frankfurt and not in Bucharest or in another European city. When it comes to Blockupy, then we can say, and this is now my opinion, they are very much against the financial globalism.
Another incident occurred recently also. The Polish political activist and scholar Mateusz Piskorski and his team were searched by the Polish police. Piskorski was arrested on the suspicion of spying and put in prison. He is still imprisoned. Who is Piskorski and why was he arrested?
Mateusz Piskorski is one of my very best friends. He is the
That's why I'm asking you about
He is the vice director of our German Center for Eurasian Studies. So he's there, my deputy. And he was arrested at May 18 this year, where I waited in Moscow for him because we wanted to celebrate our birthday at this day. We have at the same day birthday at May 18, and he didn't come. And I was told later on that he was arrested by Polish secret police. So just that you know a little bit about the circumstances. He is now since more than 3 months in prison. The Polish state prolonged the prison time for another 3 months. He is in prison without a trial, without a clear stance why he was arrested. So there were a lot of rumors, espionage for Russia, espionage for Iraq, espionage for China. So they were simply picking out from his Facebook profile, I think, every country he ever visited. That,
it's a political arrest.
It's absolutely a political arrest, yes. It has nothing to do with espionage. We have to see that Poland, especially Poland, is an overly hysterical country with a hysterical leadership when it comes to Russia, but also to Germany. Poland is the country which is the most Western. They invite always American soldiers.
But the same thing also happened with Professor Dugin, Alexander Dugin, who was also denied entry into Greece recently, even though he is not on any sanctions list. So it's a flagrant war on the ideas, perhaps.
Absolutely yes, absolutely yes. And by the way, the Dugin incident happened, I think, in the same week when Piskorski was arrested. We know that in Czech Republic also friends of mine were not arrested, but they were interrogated. So there was something going on, a bigger operation, especially in Eastern Europe. And what is interesting, it started 2-3 months after the CIA and the American services announced to help their European counterparts in the hunt, in the witch hunt against the so-called Russian influence spies. So who is a Russian influence spy? This is anyone who is giving an interview to a Russian TV station or radio station and not being totally anti-Putin.
Now, I cannot but ask you something about Syria. You've been there, you've been on the ground, and there are two huge differences between the Russian anti-terror mission in Syria and the Western so-called anti-terror mission, as you say. And also the leaked NATO report said that the Russian task force in Syria had demonstrated remarkable efficiency and professionalism and was outperforming the more widespread groupings of US-led so-called Islamic State coalition. So what can you tell us about that? Wow.
I think the Russian mission made one thing from the beginning in a very correct way. They didn't distinguish terrorists by the badge they wear on their uniforms, sorry, and by the flags. They understood perfectly well that there are swifts from terrorist groups, that terrorist groups are today Jabhat al-Nusra, then they change to that group, and then others change there.
They change the
that
name,
it is not a static, that there's not a static group which is super extremist and the others are all the liberals and moderates, but that there is and if you want really to be successful in your fight, you have not just to fight a badge or a flag, you have to fight the people who are on behalf of this flag or of other flags killing people. And I think that is the first thing they did perfectly well, and they didn't have any respect by the American protests that the Russians also attacked those rebel or terrorist forces who are on the payroll of the American Secret Service. So the Americans were protesting from the beginning, and I remember this very funny and ironic remark of Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, who said, yes, the Americans shall simply give the coordinates, the GPS coordinates of their troops in Syria, so they know where not to bombard.
True.
And I think that was a super joke, of course. But I think that is the most decisive thing. They didn't distinguish, while the Americans, I mean, even while the Americans bombarded, the area of the so-called Islamic State became larger and larger and didn't really have any damages. On the other side, we know that the Americans were indeed bombarding Syrian facilities which were not in the hands of terrorists, which were still in the hands of, or in the hands of the Syrian government forces, with the excuse to say, yes, but in case the terrorists conquer this, they cannot take use of this anymore.
And the same thing also happened not only in Syria, but also in Iraq.
Yes. So that is very lame. I mean, you really need to believe that your audience is overly stupid to buy that narrative. But on the other side, the Americans know perfectly well that it's at the end not about selling a story. It is about to have geopolitical efforts, and the Americans need the Islamic State, and they need these radical forces to be a geopolitical bulldozer. Because what the so-called Islamic State is right now doing, it's doing the perfect field to clean the country, to disintegrate it for the future governance. And the Russians were the obstacle, but not just the Russians, of course also Iran, the Syrian army itself, Hezbollah, well, everyone supporting the Syrian government there is resisting. Again, we have the same conflict. We have the liberal unipolar power on the one side with the Americans and the EU, and then we have the multipolar powers. We have Hezbollah, we have Iran, Russia,
the 4+1.
Syria.
Yes,
Exactly.
Manuel Ogden, writer, director of the German Center for Eurasian Studies. Many thanks indeed for joining us again on this interview from من الداخل on الميادين.
Thank you.
You're most welcome, sir. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. المزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@الميادين.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل، من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.